So I'm just going to ask these guys, we'll just have a little couple of quick questions and then we'll take those questions, some more questions from everyone from the floor. So, get your questions ready, won't you? So certainly I think one of the things that I was really interested in, I suppose, was that, Lucy, when you were talking about the champions and setting up those, finding a champion, and Rod, what you were saying with being it's part of a system, there's so many involved, and both of you talking about collaboration, I suppose, and how you dealt, I suppose, Lucy, with that high level of finding those champions and getting through some of those barriers to making that policy work.
Yeah, I was once described by the head of our walking advocacy organisation, Living Streets, as a lone voice, because he remembers the 5 years when, before the mayor had said anything about healthy streets, when it was just me going around going, this seems like a good idea to me, what does everyone else think? And I did spend a very long time doing that, and I think that the strength of Healthy Streets is that a lot of other people said they thought it was a good idea too, and you don't get a high-level senior champion putting their neck on the line. They only say they think something's a good idea if they're pretty confident that the people who they need to agree with them already think it's a good idea as well. So when the Mayor of London said, I'm taking the Healthy Streets approach, he said that knowing that all of his key stakeholders would give him a big round of applause and say, good, we've been waiting for someone to come along and say that. So it's not that someone just suddenly pops up and makes all your dreams come true. You have to put a lot of groundwork in to build a consensus, to build a community in support of change, who can then provide the air cover and the ground support for the champion who's going to actually make that bold statement.
So those others would be other transport engineers, community members, other government agencies?
It was really broad. So an important issue in big cities like Sydney and London is there's a bit of a myth that making streets better for people is somehow anti-business or bad for the economy. So an important part of it is getting the business community to ask for it as well. So it wasn't just the walking and cycling advocacy organisations, it wasn't just community groups, it wasn't just local government, but it was also making sure the business community also came out in support of it as well.
So Rod, in that context of, you were showing lots of the policy is there, the policies are there, the hooks that we can pull on. What Lucy's saying about getting more engagement or collaboration around that, how is that progressing, or do you think needs to progress in New South Wales?
I think I said it, I guess, at probably ad nauseum almost, really the idea, the strength of place-based planning, where I think the challenge for place-based planning in the past has been for local government to engage with the state government quite often. I mean, I'm just repeating what we've been told. We were commissioners on the commission together until reasonably recently, and that's what we heard loud and clear from local government. So really being able to bring in state agencies, and so that's what's so interesting about something like Liverpool, where you do have the Department of Health, you have the universities, but then also in what was the Roads and Maritime, now Transport for New South Wales, actually actively engaged at a local government level, but also, of course, local government working with the local community. In other words, the complement, I think, to a champion is the local constituency. And it's the local constituency, which is that work I showed in Liverpool, who are going to be interested in what's the livability proposition for me, what's the improvement, which of course is a political mandate, but also it's a political basis then for a mayor to then champion that. So I think champions don't come out of thin air in terms of their technical constituency, if you like, or their support, but also, the political constituency is absolutely essential. So it's balancing those two, I think.
And Lucy, that ties in really nicely with what you were saying about the importance of the surveys and evidence and showing the results and the benefits. Yeah?
I always say there's two key bits of data that you need to be able to provide your politician before you can ask them to stand by you in making these kinds of changes. The first one is that you have to show that it's possible for people to not use their cars for journeys. So you need to show that there are things that people could walk or cycle to or take the bus to. within a walkable, cyclable or bus journey distance, there's no point in picking a place which has been designed to be entirely car dependent and try to convince a politician to stand by a policy to get everyone walking, because there's nowhere for them to walk to. So you have to give them that data, because the first thing they're going to get in pushback is the people who say this is a ridiculous idea, of course we couldn't possibly switch, and they will pick the one journey that is impossible for them to switch out of car, which is often the commute. They'll say, what, you now want me to walk for 5 hours to get to work every day? Whereas actually what you want to focus on is on the huge number of local journeys to shops and schools and the dentist and all the rest of it. So giving them that clear data so that they can be focused on what the change is that they're proposing. So that's one of them. And the other is that you need to be able to show them that broadly the local community are supportive of a better local environment. And it is as vague as that. Pick any statistic you can get, but you need to give the politicians some confidence that the people who may or may not vote for them are broadly supportive of some kind of policies that make streets safer for children to walk to school, or that are easier for older people to get to the doctor's surgery, or where the air is cleaner, whatever the local issues are. Find some data that shows that people are supportive of the change, because if I was a politician, I wouldn't stand in front of a policy that I didn't know was going to be supported by people and I didn't know was possible to deliver either. So these are the absolute basics, and we often are so down in the detail that we forget about getting those basic bits of information across to them.
So does that help those couple of people? One that talked about depressive, or, depressing, and evidence, man, about, so Lucy's saying, how we can get through this and be very positive. So questions from the floor. Have we got something? I'd like you please to perhaps stand and give your name, and if you're from an organisation, just so we know your context of where you're from.
Hi everyone, I'm David from Bike Sydney, a community cycling advocacy group. It's not an easy question, but just to set up the question, all of this is great stuff. We've all been here possibly 10, 15 years. All of this stuff gets to play in the moment in the space left over by roads. Just in case people don't know, the RMS now ceases to exist. The Roads Authority has been assumed into Transport for New South Wales. So the question is, and it's not an easy one, but in this space we have, it seems an opportune time to reform the road rules, but particularly what I mean at a strategic level is now to break that nexus of all of these ideas not being able to play in the road reserve. Sydney's about a third of its land space is just roads and car parks, a third. So it seems we need to get these ideas, placemaking ideas, great they are, to also play in the road reserves, and it seems that the preemptive need is to reform silos, reform legislation, and possibly even ministries. Is there anything you can say about, changing the silos, the transport silos, to being properly integrated with placemaking?
Lucy, do you want to say something about how it worked in the UK?
Yeah. So I think it was helpful for us to go through that process of looking at movement and place, just to move us on from the concept that all public space that is grey, i.e. what were called roads, was just about moving cars. So we had to go through that process in London of a conversation that got all the people who hadn't yet thought about it to think that actually the space between the buildings is not just about moving vehicles. We moved then on to healthy streets, and I think that was uncomfortable for transport professionals because it's not a framework that was born out of transport. So movement and place is an evolution of traditional transport planning, which is based on the concept that the primary objective is to move vehicles around as efficiently as possible. Movement and place says we're moving the vehicles around and we have to do other things as well. But healthy streets starts from a completely different starting point, which is it doesn't matter what on earth you're thinking of doing in that space. Your starting point is this space fit for human consumption? And then you work out if you need to move some stuff around in it or whether you want it to be a play space or whatever. But the starting point is this fit for human consumption? And when you start from that different point of view, it does help to dissolve some of those long-held decision-making defaults around roads for cars and everything being a battle between space for cars versus everything else, because the starting point is no longer what space are we taking away from cars, it's we've got to make this humane, and then how are we going to accommodate whatever movement needs to happen in it.
Rod, do you want to add anything about the...
Look, I think Lucy's just put it really clearly, but I guess I'd say again, if our starting point is different, which is to do with your point, I agree with you absolutely, it's about 30 to 35%, depends on the area, is road space, the road reserve. So that is our, dare I say it again, that's our country, that's our public space, it's our public domain, it's ours. And so the starting point for that is, what is a beautiful public domain? Then you would start by saying, does it need to be, first of all, more than 10 kilometres an hour as a shared space? Maybe it's 30, bearing in mind that, as we all know, the average travel speed through Sydney is about 37 anyway. The wonderful Melbourne trams travelled at 15. You know, so I'm saying that the reality of a fairly congested city, which is what we've got, is not high travel speeds. And so if we start from that and then work which roads do need to be the ones that have to have volume and speed and so forth, it's just you're starting at a different point. In exactly the same way as I was suggesting you go start with the blue and then the green and then the density, in the same way with transport, we've got to start not just saying we prioritise pedestrians, but start to actually have that as the starting point for the planning. And I think if it then becomes, cyclists and safety, and working from that up to show why this street has to be more, bearing in mind 83% of roads by length are local government in Sydney, right? So 17% are state roads. So maybe they are the fast roads, but the others, the 83%, could quite possibly be much, much more calm.
Other question?
Jane Bringolf, I'm from Centre for Universal Design Australia. My shout out for toilets wasn't thinking about a bathroom break. It actually was a real part of a real question. One of the things that we often forget is the importance of public toilets in walkability, and I should also mention wheelability. And my question to Lucy is, I saw no mention of inclusive design or accessibility in anything that you said there. And I was just wondering if it's so well embedded in planning in the UK or in London that it now no longer needs a mention, or is it something, because it certainly needs a mention here in Sydney. And so when everybody's talking about walkability, I would like everyone to also think about wheelability and people who don't have the ability to walk very well.
So, first of all, on the toilets, I thought the toilets remark was to ask why one of the indicators isn't public toilets, which I even produced a document in London which was frequently asked questions, and one of them is, why isn't public toilets one of the healthy streets indicators? One of the indicators is people feel relaxed. I don't feel relaxed when I'm desperate for the toilet and there's nowhere to go to the toilet. So the healthy streets indicators are not a list of things that you find on a street, it's how people feel. And people feeling relaxed is about making sure that we're designing streets for everyone, and everyone feels welcome is about making streets feel welcoming for everyone. I don't think a street is walkable if it's not walkable for everyone, including wheelable. So I think the standards that we set are key, and this is where the detail of healthy streets really has some power, because if you look through the check tool that the engineers have to go through, the things that they think of as an acceptable standard for a design of a street, just common sense, this is fine, we've always done it this way, they get the lowest possible score with that. And then they have to look at, well, I need to get my score to go up, so what do I need to do? So one of the elements in this check tool is that you have to pick the street that you're redesigning, you have to find the point where the footway is narrowest, and you have to score that. So if they've got a lovely wide footway all the way along, but then they've got some difficult pinch point, which is kind of tricky because they've got a left turn feeder lane and they've got some posts in the pavement. If the space for the people who are walking or wheeling is narrower than a certain distance, their whole project gets a terrible score and gets a big red flag on it. And this is how we make sure that they pick up the lowest level, they get the score up. And it's making sure that our streets are inclusive for everyone. So it's all baked in there, but it's not put out at the front, because it's just saying these have got to be good streets for everyone, and that includes everyone.
Love that scoring. I think that was great. Other questions?
My name's Nick Chapman. I'm the Greenway Place Manager at the Inner West Council. So anybody who's signed up for the Greenway Walkshop this afternoon, this is what I look like.
He's doing advertising.
20 people have signed up. We're fully booked. This is not an advertisement. But my question really is for Lucy, and maybe Rod might like to chip in. We're about to go into school holidays, and Sydney tends to breathe a sigh of relief because the streets get really so much quieter. Now, we've got a program where we're focusing on 4 schools in striking distance of the Greenway. And I'm really interested, Lucy, in whether you've connected with that stakeholder group and how you deal with the 3 risk managers, the school principal, the helicopter parent, and the traffic engineer.
Well, I know that we're wrapping up soon. Yes. I could talk for hours about schools. I will tell you about one thing that's being done in the UK, and I think it's also picking up in other places, maybe here as well. We have a program called School Streets, where the street that leads to the school is just simply closed in the first part of the day and when the kids are being picked up, apart from residents who live on that street who can still access the street. And I met a woman from Solihull, which is an area in Birmingham, and she had worked for 20 years in promoting kids walking to school. And she said, I've done 20 years of promotional work, and what happens is during the period while we're promoting walk to school, everyone thinks it's marvellous, the parents are all on board, everyone says how much better they feel, and then as soon as the week or the month is over, everyone goes back to doing what they were doing before. And she said, this is the only thing that I have seen actually have a sustained impact, and it's because they're not able to choose to drive their children to school anymore. And this is the point that I was making earlier about people choose to walk and cycle. If there is the option that is easy and simple to drive and park, people will do that. So we have to acknowledge that and accept it's part of who we are as human beings, and plan that in, and not just think that if we sound really excited about walking to school, that's going to be enough to change millions of years of human evolution.
Okay, morning tea awaits, I think. And so thanks very much, Lucy and Rod. I think